Well, this is the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive, and we'll chat through those front pages with consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and deputy online editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us right through until midnight. Good to see you both. Before we have a chat, let's just run through the front pages for you, and with the headline, Doubly Jabbly. It's great, isn't it? The Metro reacts to the news that from August the 16th, not only will anyone who's been double vaccinated be exempt from being pinged by the NHS app, but also EU and US citizens who've had both jabs can enter England without restrictions. In response to those stories, the Mail declares Britain's back in business. The Express also focuses on the lifting of those restrictions on travel with a headline, Welcome Back. Britain opens up for business. The Telegraph says that following on from the dispensation for American travellers, the government is asking Washington to do the same for Britons. And Schuffeneck, says the Star, with word that northern accents could soon die out. Nonsense. Oh, absolute codswell up there. Let's talk to Andrew Pearce and Rachel Cunliffe. I'm absolutely appalled at the idea that northern accents might die out, because then I won't be able to talk to any of my family. Andrew, let's start with the Mail and Britain being back in business.
We love your accent, Steve.
Thank you.
And it's a great front page for the Mail. And we had a pretty positive front page today when we said an incredibly senior minister in the cabinet had said COVID is now on the back foot. It could be virtually in full-time retreat by October. So today, the logical next step, the government has announced that visitors who've been double jabbed from the United States, EU, can come to Britain without any quarantine restrictions from Monday. France doesn't apply, which screws my holiday plans. So France doesn't apply because that is still on the amber plus list. So but we're going to get a statement on France, Spain, and the traffic lights at the end of next week. But this is a hugely important step for the travel industry, which has been on its knees. And also, we forget how important tourism is to the British economy, inward tourism. The West End of London, the theatres, which have been dark for 15 months, they won't survive without tourists coming back. That's the same in places like Bath, Edinburgh, up and down the land. So it's a hugely important step, and it's a sign that finally we're getting a real dividend now from the success of the COVID vaccine rollout. What is it now? 81% of adults have been jabbed. 71% have been double jabbed. It's a tremendous success. Well done, the NHS. I know they've got a lot wrong, the government, but they've got this vaccine rollout done really, really well. And to the doomsayers, like Professor Ferguson, who was behind a lot of the lockdown rules, wasn't he saying when Boris lifted the last wave of restrictions that infections would shoot up to 200,000 a day? Well, they've dropped for 7 days running, a slight increase yesterday, but we're going in the right direction.
Rachel, what do you make of it all? I mean, the Express has got a similar sort of jubilant headline.
I suffer from anxiety, and so I struggle to be quite as optimistic, perhaps, as those front pages suggest. But I am certainly hopeful, seeing the rate at which cases have fallen over the past 7 days. Yes, a slight increase today, but still a 36% drop on last week at a time when, as Andrew said, we were expecting, or we were led to expect, cases going up and up and up. And I think it's quite interesting that there's still uncertainty among scientists about what it is exactly that has brought cases down. Is it a result of the vaccine rollout? Almost certainly. Is it a result of the increased transmission during the Euros, which obviously we've now seen the peak from that? Possibly. And again, I find that quite heartening as well, just remembering that scientists don't necessarily always have all of the answers, and therefore when we get those worst case scenario figures, yes, we should take them very seriously, and obviously we should do everything that we can to prevent those situations happening, but also that's not set in stone. There is uncertainty, and it may not be as bad as expected, which is what we're seeing now. In terms of opening up, in terms of allowing passengers from Europe and the US, if they're double vaxxed, to come here, I think that leading the way on that reopening of borders for a global hub like Britain is very important. The concerns I have would be the concerns which some officials have as well, which are that some residents of Europe have had a vaccine that perhaps the UK doesn't consider as effective as some of the ones we've had here. And also certain states in the US are documenting COVID vaccines in a way on paper rather than a digital version. So it's possibly slightly easier to forge. But I think you're going to have those issues on opening up whenever it happens. And cautiously optimistic, I would say, is my mood and the mood of the nation right now, looking ahead to Monday.
But the Labour Party says this is reckless. And to be fair, there is concern, Andrew, isn't there, about the beta variant and the gamma variant, which we don't think the vaccine is as effective against, and which, you know, pretty much are just not in this country at the moment. Well, it's going to open a pathway for them, isn't it?
Well, look, I think these vaccines have proved remarkably resilient, Steve. And I think Keir Starmer has called this one wrong, actually. He said reckless. He said we would be soaring up to 100,000 infections a day. He's gone rather quiet on that now. It was a line which all the shadow ministers were parroting. I'm not saying that he wanted it to go horribly wrong, but he banked on it going wrong. And now the figures are going the other way. So it'd be interesting to see if Labour welcome that, if they start to say that's it, because it is great news. The infections are falling far quicker than even even some of the more optimistic scientists suggested. And I think we've got to have confidence in this vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been brilliant. So has the Pfizer vaccine. And the Delta variant, it's got the better of the Delta variant, the Kent variant. And I think we should be pretty confident. And I think Rachel's right too. There was a spike after the Euros, the football, tens of thousands of people coming to Britain, lots of people coming into Wembley for the matches. The football fans I saw in Leicester Square, not only were they not wearing masks, most of them weren't wearing shirts either, as they were swilling beer and wine out of bottles from 10 in the morning. So there was always going to be a spike. But the really important thing is there hasn't been a substantial or even disturbing increase in the number of deaths in our hospitals. The number of admissions to hospitals have gone up, but not dramatically.
OK, when it comes, Rachel, to, you know, certainly letting travellers from the United States in, the Telegraph looking at, you know, we want tit for tat on this. If we're letting the Americans in here, we want to be able to head over there. Are we likely to make any progress?
It's that special relationship again, isn't it? We let US travellers into Britain without quarantining as long as they're double vaxxed. Can we expect reciprocal rights in return? Not yet. I think this isn't particularly surprising, as is often pointed out in discussions about, say, trade negotiations. The US, a much larger and more powerful and influential country, sadly, than Britain. Though Britain is also very influential, just not quite on the level of being able to bargain with the US in quite that way. And I think there's an awful lot on Joe Biden's plate at the moment. Handling the pandemic is going to be the core feature of certainly his first year in office and potentially his entire presidency. He's not going to risk that just because officials in Britain are saying, we're letting your guys in, could you let ours in too? I think it's more surprising not yet getting reciprocal rights from the EU, just because of the volume of travel is higher there. I'm sure this will happen in time, and it does take one country leading the way and saying, we trust your vaccines, and therefore we trust your government and that globalized system and freedom of travel that the globalized liberal economy was based on pre-COVID. But I think us making a stand and saying that we accept that is important. Expecting America to agree to it just because we've said that we'll take their travellers, possibly a little bit naive.
Do you reckon, Andrew?
Yeah, there's talk that they might not change the rules until September. And the funny thing was, you know, just before G7, when they all came to Cornwall and we saw Cornwall at its best showcase, there was speculation even then that there could be an announcement between Britain and the United States about reopening the airways. That really didn't happen. And Rachel's right, Biden's not going to budge. He saw how much damage the response of Trump to COVID caused to his presidency. I don't think Biden would even be the president of the United States now if Trump had got a grip of COVID much sooner and much earlier and hadn't downplayed it and ridiculed it and even suggested at one point, didn't he, that you should inject yourself with bleach to try and rid yourself of it. So he's going to be ultra cautious. They've had a pretty good vaccination rollout in the United States, but of course, every state is different and every state has different rules. So I think if you want to go on holiday to San Francisco, Steve, or Miami Beach, if that's your bag, you're going to have to wait till at least the middle of September.
Miami Beach, only if I can wear a full body suit, I think, at my age, Andrew. Look, let's have a look at the front of the Times, where, I mean, because it's interesting, isn't it, in all of this, that obviously there is a clear appetite for these changes for business and indeed from a lot of members of the public, but the scientists still pretty concerned. I mean, you called them sort of doommongers earlier on, Andrew, but they are following the science. They are trying to be sensible in all of this.
Well, it depends which scientists you listen to. That's always the point. It's like anything else, isn't it? You get 6 scientists in a room, they can all have completely different views. We heard Professor Lockdown on the Today programme, was it yesterday, almost blithely saying that actually it looked now like COVID would be gone or could be in full retreat by October, not even acknowledging the fact he'd been predicting just a few weeks ago we'd be having up to 200,000 cases a day. So there's a lot of, I'm not saying eating humble pie, they all make their predictions as best they can on the modelling they can, but I think when Boris Johnson took that decision to remove those last lot of restrictions, I suspect there was even some opposition from within SAGE, and I'm not even sure Whitty and Vallance, the two Chuckle brothers, as we like to call them, the chief scientific officer and chief medical officer, were 100%. Ultimately, I think it was a political decision, and I think it was right. It was a political decision in the end, because the economy, we cannot neglect the economy any longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, though, Rachel, isn't it? Because, I mean, Andrew's point may be absolutely valid. I'm sure the Chancellor would probably be thinking that. But, you know, we've been told from the outset we're going to follow the science. Well, it seems like we are diverging from that now.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. As Andrew said, the science is mixed. And the fact is that with the vaccine rollout, the scientists just don't know how the modelling is going to play out, because there is so much unknown, particularly the rates of transmission for people who are double vaccinated. And I think you've got to balance the wanting to keep the restrictions in order to reduce transmission with wanting to maximise vaccine take-up. And one of the ways that you eliminate vaccine hesitancy is by saying to people, this actually works, and this is the thing. If you do this, your life and the life of everyone you love and the life of everyone in the country can go back to normal. We had this weird system for a couple of months where the government was very much encouraging people to get the vaccine, but also being very cautious about the benefits of the vaccine. And there have been concerns that has fueled a certain amount of vaccine hesitancy. Why would I take something which the government is telling me might not have any impact? So I think you've got to balance those two things. And the government is trying to do that. I think it's also worth noting that while we're talking lots about how we're opening up the economy and we're letting travellers in and how this is really good for business, it's still another over 2 weeks, 16th of August, until the rules are changing and double vaccinated people who are pinged or who come into contact with somebody who tests positive won't have to isolate anymore after that point. Lots of other countries aren't doing that. Lots of other countries are saying if you're double vaccinated, you don't have to isolate. So Britain actually is still being quite cautious in that regard. Certain restrictions easing, other restrictions saying it's a balance. And I think following the science at this point means looking at the data very carefully and making decisions based on that, because we just don't know.
OK, lovely. Thank you both. Don't go anywhere, because in just a couple of minutes we've got more papers, including a focus on that success for Team GB, including Charlotte Dujardin's record medal haul. Back in a minute. This is the press preview, and we're going through the papers with Andrew Pearce and Rachel Cunliffe. So let's turn our attention to the Olympics. We've got something to celebrate at last, and by heck do we need it. Andrew, in the Mail, a lot of focus on Charlotte Dujardin, her record-breaking medal haul.
She's what a performer. She is now the most successful female British Olympian in history. She got bronze in the individual dressage today. having got bronze in the team yesterday, having won golds before. She's remarkable. I mean, dressage is mind-boggling to me. I don't know how on earth anybody can exert such control over a horse, but she does it. She's fantastic. She's very humble, and she said she feels incredibly humble to have pinched that record because it was previously held by the woman who's the head of UK sport, who is a rower, Catherine Granger, and she was the first to congratulate her. So it's a terrific achievement for her. And these Olympics coming so soon after the Euros, where even though we lost in the end on penalties, of course we lost on penalties, we always do. I think they cheered everybody up after the horrors of lockdown. And the Olympics, I was a bit sceptical whether people would get swept up in the excitement. And I think that people have been, including me, Steve. And as you know, what I know about sport, you can write on the back of a postage stamp that's been shrunk in the rain.
Yeah, you don't need to know a lot sometimes to enjoy it, though. Dear, and I have to say, Rachel, I mean, there's a lot of focus. We've been reporting on this tonight, the fact that, we've got more women than men in Team GB for the first time ever, and the women are leading from the front. Absolutely.
It's wonderful to see. And in terms of getting into the Olympics, what I love about the Olympics is you start watching a sport that you've never really considered before, and within 5 minutes you're really into it and you understand the scoring. So I watched the dressage, or horse ballet, as I like to call it, and Charlotte Dujardin was incredible, the control she had over the horse. This horse is trotting sideways, the hooves are coming up and crossing over. How can you do that? It's such a magical sport to watch, but again, one that outside of the 4-year cycles of the Olympics you very rarely see, and so I think that's what I love about it, discovering new sports, becoming an armchair expert in something in just a couple of minutes, and then obviously the excitement as those records do get broken, which is always wonderful to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're tight for time, but we've got to look at the swimmers as well, Andrew, because I mean they have been outstanding.
They've controlled the pool. They've dominated it in the way that we do so well at cycling and rowing. But in the Team GB in the pool, another gold medal today in the relay, the 200-metre freestyle relay. Unbelievable. I mean, they won it by almost half a pool. Extraordinary. And the 18-year-old who swam the third leg, 18 years old, and his parents, when we got into lockdown, bought him like a 5-foot deep paddling pool so he could train in the garden. And his mum, who's a teacher, getting up at 3 o'clock every morning to drive him to train in a swimming pool. She'd sleep in the car, bring him back, then she'd go to work in a classroom. The parents of these athletes deserve gold medals too.
Yeah, I mean, it is a family success in all of this. I mean, it just highlights the shame that they're not there to witness their children do so well, Rachel.
So sad.
Yeah, and you saw that as well with Tom Daley's win, and the interview with his mother and his husband and his son all the way over in Canada via Skype. Obviously, in normal times they would have been there in the stadium. So it's definitely got a different vibe, this Olympics, but that doesn't take away from the celebration, especially when it's unexpected, like in swimming where we're not used to doing so well, or like the women's gymnastics, the women's gymnastics team, the GB team, managed to get a bronze medal, which I don't think anyone was expecting. So that was a very exciting moment as well. Those moments of unexpected glory.
Yeah, it's lovely. We need something to smile about. They're certainly delivering on that. Lovely. Thank you both.